They say family is supposed to love you unconditionally, but sometimes the people closest to you are the ones who hurt you the most. Growing up, I had a younger brother, David. From the outside, we seemed like any other siblings, but the truth was, David wasn't just my brother, he was my worst nightmare. You might think he was jealous of me, but that wasn't the case. If anything, I was the forgotten child. My mother adored David. He could do no wrong in her eyes. If he took something of mine without asking, "Oh, don't be so selfish. You're brothers." If he picked on me during dinner, that's just how boys bond. Even when he did something truly cruel, she'd brush it off like it was nothing. I learned early on that no one was coming to save me. David wasn't just a typical annoying little brother. He was mean. I still remember the time he almost broke my glasses on purpose, laughing while I struggled to see, or the time he put small rocks in my cereal and I only noticed before taking a bite. When I told my mother, she chuckled and said, "Oh, that's just how brothers play." I don't know what kind of play that was, but to me, David was nothing but a bully. By the time we were teenagers, he had made my life hell. He mocked me for wearing glasses, for being shorter than him, for not being as athletic. He read my diary and tattled to my mom about my private thoughts, and one day he crossed a line I could never forgive. I don't even remember what we were arguing about, but I will never forget what he said to me. "You should just kill yourself. Nobody in this house even cares about you." I stood there, frozen, hearing those words from my own brother. The person who was supposed to be my family was like a dagger to the heart. I kept quiet for a week after that. No one noticed. No one even realized I was hurting. But that day changed. Something in me. I wasn't going to let David win anymore. The turning point came when David stole my savings, money I had worked hard to earn from chores. When I caught him sneaking off on his bike, I confronted him. He smirked. "What are you going to do about it? Run to Daddy?" I don't know what came over me, but before I knew it, I punched him straight in the face. David fell backward, stunned. I reached into his pocket, took my money back, and shoved him to the ground. He started crying, which, honestly, was kind of funny. My mother ran outside and, of course, immediately took his side. She scolded me, telling me I should be a better role model. But for the first time in my life, I didn't care what she thought. And when my father found out, he looked at David and said, "You should be grateful he only punched you. If you stole from someone else, they'd call the cops." For the first time, David wasn't the golden child. He wasn't untouchable. After that, things changed. He kept his distance. He stopped messing with me, at least physically. But the resentment in his eyes never faded. And I knew one thing for sure. I needed to get out. So I did. I worked hard in school, earned a full-ride scholarship, and left home at 18. I never looked back. I thought I had finally escaped. I thought the worst was behind me, but I had no idea. Years later, David would destroy my life in a way I never saw coming. Leaving home was the best decision I ever made. For the first time in my life, I felt free. No more walking on eggshells around my mother. No more dealing with David's cruelty. I could finally focus on my own life, my own goals. College was a fresh start. I threw myself into my studies, determined to build a future far away from my toxic family. I made friends, stayed busy, and for the first time, I felt like I belonged. And then I met Karen. She was everything I had ever wanted, kind, funny, and so incredibly warm. She made me feel seen in a way no one ever had before. We met at a party during my second year. A mutual friend introduced us, and we clicked instantly. While other girls I had met were interested in partying and short-term flings, Karen was different. She had a calming presence, a soft way of speaking that made you feel safe. I told her about my past, the favoritism, the bullying, the years of feeling like I never truly had a family. She listened, holding my hand, telling me she understood, and Just like that, I was in love. By the time we graduated, Karen and I were inseparable. I proposed to her a month after our final exams, and she said yes. Our wedding was small but beautiful. My parents came looking proud. Even David was there, standing off to the side, barely acknowledging me. But I didn't care. I had everything I ever wanted, or at least I thought I did. Karen and I settled into married life easily. I had landed a good job, and we were comfortable. A year later, when she told me she was pregnant, I was overjoyed. Me, a father. After everything I had been through, I finally had a chance to build the family I had always dreamed of. A real home, filled with love, trust, and stability, everything I never had growing up. I was determined to be the best husband and father possible, and for a while, I thought I was. I woke up early to help with the baby, took Karen on date nights, worked hard to provide for our little family. Life felt perfect. Sure, there were stressors. Karen's job was demanding, and mine required long hours. But we made it work. At least that's what I believed. Looking back now, I see the little things I ignored. The subtle signs that something wasn't quite right. Karen started working late more often. She seemed distracted, distant at times. She'd laugh a little too hard at messages on her phone, but would turn the screen away when I got close. I chalked it up to exhaustion. Parenthood was hard, and we were both adjusting, and besides, I trusted her. She was my wife, the mother of my child. She would never betray me, but I was wrong. So wrong. The first time she cheated, I didn't find out until years later. It was with a married co-worker, an affair that had lasted on and off for almost 3 years. When I confronted her, she cried, told me she had been confused, that she regretted it. She begged me not to leave, saying our child deserved a complete family, and like an idiot I forgave her. I told myself it was a one-time mistake, that people change, that we could rebuild. And for a while, things got better. Or at least that's what I let myself believe. But deep down, a seed of doubt had been planted. I no longer looked at Karen the same way. I tried. I really did. But no matter how much I loved her, the trust had been fractured. I told myself that time would fix it, that if I just loved her enough, she would never hurt me again. But then, years later, she sat me down one night with a confession that shattered my entire world. She had been having an affair again, and this time the father of my child might not even be me. There are moments in life that break you, moments so devastating that they take everything you thought was real and shatter it into pieces. This was one of those moments. Karen sat across from me, her face pale, her hands trembling. I could already tell that whatever she was about to say was bad, but I wasn't prepared for just how bad it would be. She took a deep breath, avoiding my eyes, and whispered, "I've been having an affair." For a moment, I couldn't process what I had just heard. Again? The world around me blurred. The air felt heavier, pressing down on my chest. I could hear my heartbeat in my ears, pounding like a war drum. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to stay calm. "Who?" My voice barely came out. Karen looked at me then, guilt flashing across her face. She hesitated, her lips trembling. And that hesitation alone told me this wasn't just some random guy. I felt my stomach drop. David. The name barely left her lips, but it exploded inside my mind like a bomb. David. My brother. My vision tunneled. 1,000 memories came flooding back. At once, the bullying, the humiliation, the years of torment, and now this, the very person who had spent his life making mine miserable, had now taken the one thing that mattered most to me. My wife, my son, my family. I stood up so fast, my chair scraped against the floor with a sharp screech. My hands were shaking. I needed to move, to run, to escape before the rage inside me consumed me whole. But Karen kept talking. She told me how it started, how she had tried to fix things between me and David, how she had felt sorry for him after a breakup and became his friend, how behind my back they had been sneaking around. I clenched, my fists, trying to hold myself together. "Did you love him?" I forced the words out, each syllable laced with venom. Karen's eyes filled with tears. "No," she whispered. "It wasn't supposed to happen." I laughed, a cold, humorless laugh. "But it did." She nodded, looking down. "I wanted to stop. I really did." My voice dropped to a whisper. "And my son?" Her breath hitched. That tiny hesitation again, like she already knew the answer but didn't want to say it. "I don't know," she finally admitted. That was it. That was the moment something inside me broke. The love I had for Karen. The family I had worked so hard to build. The future I had dreamed of, gone, burned to the ground by the two people I had trusted the most. I don't remember much of what happened next. I think I laughed again. A dry, bitter sound that didn't even feel real. Karen started crying, reaching for me, begging me to stay. She told me it was a mistake, that we could get past this. "If you love me," she sobbed, "you'll fight for me." I stared at her, barely recognizing the woman in front of me. Fight for her? I had spent years fighting for her love, fighting for our family, fighting to keep everything together, and all that time she had been betraying me. I didn't yell. I didn't break things. I just packed my bags. Karen followed me, sobbing, grabbing at my arm. "Please," she begged. "Think about our son, her son." "David's son." I turned to her, my voice calm but hollow. "He's not mine." She gasped like I had slapped her. "How can you say that? You're the only father he's ever known." I hesitated. For years I had been there. I had fed him, bathed him, held him when he cried. I had watched him take his first steps, heard his first words. I had loved him. But now all I could see was David, and it made me sick. So I walked out that door and never looked back. The next day, I went. To see my parents, I sat them down and told them everything. Every disgusting, gut-wrenching detail. My mother gasped, covering her mouth in shock. My father? He just stared at me, his face blank, unreadable. Then I pulled out my phone, dialed David's number, and put it on speaker. When he picked up, his voice was casual, even amused. "Hey, what's up, bro?" I gripped the phone tighter. "I know." Silence. Then David chuckled. "Know what?" "About you and Karen. About the baby." I heard his breathing change, a sharp inhale. Then he laughed. He actually laughed. "Damn, took you long enough to figure it out." A muscle twitched in my jaw. My mother's hand was shaking. My father's knuckles were white. David kept talking, his voice dripping with mockery. "Can you blame her, though? I mean, we always knew I was the better-looking brother." Something inside me snapped. I should have been furious. I should have screamed, cursed him, threatened him. But instead, I smiled. "Thanks, David." "For what?" he scoffed. "For admitting it." Silence. Then, click. He hung up. I turned to my parents. "You heard him." My father stood up. His face was unreadable, but his voice was deadly calm. "He's done." "Dad," my mother whispered. "No," he cut her off. "I want nothing to do with him," and he meant it. That night, my father made the biggest decision of his life. He was cutting David out of his will. No more college tuition, no more money, no more family. David was dead to him. When David found out, he panicked. He called my parents first. They ignored him. Then he called me. His voice was different now, not arrogant, not mocking. Just desperate. "Please," he whispered. "I have nothing left. For a brief moment, I felt something. Pity? Regret? But then I remembered. I remembered all the years of torment, all the pain, all the betrayal, and I made my choice. We're done. Click. The line went dead. I stared at the phone, my heart pounding, waiting for something, a rush of satisfaction, a sense of victory. But all I felt was nothing, and maybe that was the real tragedy. There was no moment of relief, no sudden weight lifted off my shoulders. Even after I cut David out of my life, even after I walked away from Karen, there was only emptiness. For weeks, I felt like I was drifting through life in a haze. I went to work. I ate. I slept. But nothing felt real. I had spent years building a life I thought was mine, a family I thought I could trust. And in an instant, it was all gone. The worst part? I didn't even know who I was without them. David tried reaching out again, through texts, through calls, through mutual friends. Each time, I ignored him, until one day, I picked up, not because I wanted to hear his voice, but because I wanted to know. Why? That was all I asked. A long silence. Then, a sigh. I don't know, man. That was it. No apology, no regret. Just empty words from an empty man. I hung up and blocked his number. That was the last time we ever spoke. My father followed through on his word. David was completely cut off. No money, no college tuition, no support. When my mother tried to reason with my dad, he gave her an ultimatum. If you want to keep talking to him, then you can leave too. She never brought it up again. And just like that, David was erased from our family. A few months later, I got a letter from Karen. I stared at it for hours before opening it. Inside was a long handwritten note, apologizing for everything. She said she missed me, that she regretted it all, that she wanted to fix things. But the words meant nothing to me. At the bottom, there was one last plea. Henry still asks about you. Please don't abandon him. I felt something crack inside me. I had tried so hard to forget about him, to forget about the little boy who once called me Dad. I thought about visiting, about trying to stay in his life, but I knew Karen too well. This wasn't just about Henry. If I let him back in, she would follow, and I couldn't let that happen. So I made my choice. I folded the letter, and I never wrote back. Time moved on, whether I wanted it to or not. I moved into a small apartment, just big enough for me. I focused on work, threw myself into projects, tried to build something new. I started going to therapy. At first, I thought it was useless, just sitting in a room talking to a stranger about my pain. But slowly, it helped. I learned to let go. Not of the past, not completely, but of the guilt. The guilt of leaving Henry. The guilt of not being enough. The guilt of ever believing Karen. And David could be better. One day, my therapist asked me a question that stuck with me. If you had the chance to go back and change anything, would you? I thought about it for a long time. And the answer was no. Because everything that happened, the pain, the betrayal, the loss, led me here, to a version of myself that was stronger, wiser, free. 5 months passed. One evening, my father and I were out golfing, something we had started doing every weekend. He treated me more like a friend now, not just a son. And for the first time in my life, I felt like I truly had a father. After we finished, we sat in the clubhouse, watching the sunset. "You doing okay?" he asked. I thought about it for a moment. Then, for the first time in a long time, I smiled. Yeah, I think I am. And for the first time, I really meant it. Looking back, I realized something. Forgiveness isn't always necessary. People love to say, you should forgive and move on. But sometimes moving on means walking away. For so long I believed that family was everything, that no matter what, blood ties couldn't be broken. But David proved me wrong. Karen proved me wrong. They showed me that some betrayals are too deep to heal, and that's okay. I don't hate them anymore. Not really. Hate takes too much energy. Energy that I would rather use to rebuild my life. David? He made his bed. Now he has to lie in it. Karen? She lost the best thing she ever had, and she has to live with that. As for me, I'm free. Free from the weight of the past. Free from the guilt. Free to finally live my life without the ghosts of betrayal following me. And you know what? That's the best revenge of all. If you've ever been betrayed, if you've ever had to walk away from someone you once loved, know this. You don't have to forgive them to heal. You just have to move forward. If you liked this story, subscribe for more shocking real-life stories. And don't forget to hit the notification bell so you never miss an update.